Money follow-up. John and I are riding on a little bit of a high right now. On Tuesday evenings, we do our weekly group coaching call with members of our credit card payoff plan. This is a group that we coach, helping them pay off credit card debt. And we just had a phenomenal call, all sorts of successes and helping people with questions and challenges and group participation. It was just a really fun call. So we're kind of running on a high. Normally we do these Queer Money follow-ups earlier in the day, but we've had to shift because some construction going on in our building.
There's a chicane song on a high, right?
Yes, there is.
With
No.
Bryan
That's
Adams?
actually Duncan Sheik.
Oh, Duncan
that was
Sheik.
remixed by Gabriel and Dresden.
Anyway.
Right. You're not here for us to talk about this. Today we're talking about gay retirement or the coming gay retirement nightmare. So we have a question for you. Are you being realistic when it comes to your retirement plan? And part of the reason why we wanted to talk about this, the idea of what's coming for the queer community when it comes to retirement, was when we listened to this episode 50 of the Queer Money Podcast, which we recorded all the way back in 2017. We were reminded about this idea of planning for retirement and some of the numbers that consistently are shared around what the queer community is doing when it comes to retirement. This episode, we interviewed our friend Todd Tressider, who we know through the FinCon or personal finance community. We had him on to talk about a path to, or the paths to, early retirement. And that was kind of the direction that we took in that particular episode. But what's interesting is we have a very common request of us, either via email, people reaching out to us through messaging on Facebook, direct messaging us and connecting with us on all of our platforms. It is so common for us to hear the story of specifically gay men. We hear this predominantly from gay men who are in their mid to late 50s, even early 60s, and they say to us, I want to retire, but I really haven't saved anything, or I have nothing saved. How can I retire? I want to retire in the next year or two. And it is a little, I guess, a little surprising, a little disheartening, but also at the same time, not that surprising that we hear this so often, that there are so many folks in the queer community who are not thinking ahead when it comes to planning for retirement.
Yeah, we see this anecdotally. We see it through the data, and unfortunately, it is kind of disappointing, right? Because you've reached 50, 60 years old. Traditionally, you're supposed to be able to plan on retiring, but so many of us get to that age and we haven't done anything. And I think Todd's strategy that we talked about on episode 50 of the Queer Money Podcast is somewhat inspirational, because it sort of he totally tears apart, shreds the traditional model of retirement planning, which he calls it's a strategy for old age financial independence.
Yeah.
And when you put it in that light, it kind of makes some sense, because not many of us want to think about old age, and retirement planning is very often, it's 20, 30, 40 years in the future. And that just seems like it's so far away to not even be relevant today. And so nobody plans for it until it's just around the corner.
Right.
And what he did was he provided a strategy that, if you've ever read Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, he talks about his definition of wealth is that your investments subsidize your lifestyle. And when we interviewed Todd for episode 50 of the Queer Money Podcast, he kind of extrapolated on that and put the pieces of the puzzle together of what exactly that looks like. And it's based on a cash flow model of not only retirement, but of day-to-day living, so that you can break free from the W-2 if you want to, or reduce your reliance on the W-2. And unfortunately, all the typical strategies for retirement planning are just sort of that old, tired out version.
Yeah. And I think that most of us, that's when we think about it in retirement, right? That's what retirement really is we want to live the life that we're living today, but we want to be able to do it without working. Well, how do you have the income that you have today without working?
Suddenly, right?
Right. Something has to be there. And I'll tell you right now, there is no one will ever make as much money through Social Security that they are making today to pay for their retirement. It's just Social Security is not a 100% cover of your expenses. It never was intended to be that way, and it never will be that way. But we all like that idea of being able to live the same lifestyle and not have to worry about a job, especially because as we age, we either are tired of working or our bodies physically are not able to work, or we want to spend those last decade or decades of our life really enjoying life as much as we possibly can, because many of us, unfortunately, lived in a time frame or time period when we really didn't enjoy work, right? So we want to be able to do that. But it brings up the question of what is retirement going to look like for LGBT folks? What is retirement going to look like for queer people? And that's where we are really constantly reminded by this coming, what we are terming here, this almost nightmare that is going to happen for many in the queer community.
Yeah, we just got an email the other day from someone who said he and his husband want to retire from. They want to leave California because it's too expensive, but they want to know where they can go. That's LGBTQ-friendly, ideally with some sort of LGBTQ community, but is also affordable. And it's kind of almost like a paradox, because typically, well, one, there are only about 22 LGBTQ retirement communities that we know of. And obviously that's limited number of roofs and limited number of beds. But then typically LGBTQ people want to retire in an LGBTQ-friendly space, which is typically the more expensive places.
Right.
And so, with the less preparation in retirement savings and investments that both the data as well as the anecdotal evidence show, as well as the trying to force everybody into this traditional model of retirement that doesn't really work. It's kind of like the LGBTQ community is setting itself up for failure. And part of the reason why this is somewhat new is that we have a whole generation of LGBTQ people, predominantly gay men, who were wiped out because of the HIV/AIDS crisis. So you're hearing about it to some degree in some circles if you're paying attention to it, and there are some struggles for retirees in the LGBTQ community today, but it's not as prevalent as we fear it's going to be, and that's why we were very excited to listen to Todd when he talked about throwing away all those the old model. Go with a more of a cash flow system, and we'll extrapolate what that is in a little bit. But basically, what you're doing is you're looking at non-conventional assets. Non-conventional for most people would be things such as real estate or having their own business, incorporating that into your day-to-day living as well as your long-term retirement strategy based on a cash flow system, not something that's solely reliant on investment growth over 20, 30, 40 years.
Right. And just to clarify what cash flow system basically means is that every month your assets, whether that is your investments or a business that you started or real estate investments, all of that is generating income for you. And that income is enough cash to cash flow your life. Right. So if I have investments, a business, and real estate, and all of that is delivering to me, let's just say $6,000 a month, as long as I can keep my expenses, including taxes and healthcare and all of that, as long as I can keep that below $6,000 a month, then I am basically cash flowing my lifestyle. I can continue to live.
And Todd says he had a great quote from this particular episode. He said, "When your cash flow exceeds your expenses, then the number of months in retirement is infinite, and therefore you're infinitely wealthy." And this is pretty much a summary of what Robert Kiyosaki talks about in Rich Dad Poor Dad. And we actually in an upcoming episode of the Queer Money Podcast, episode 253, which I think is March 9th.
March 9th.
Yeah. We talk with Patricia Red Hawk, and she talks about the same. She's a real estate investor, and she talks about the same strategy. And she predominantly uses real estate investments to create that cash flow system. And then she's less reliant on the market's whims and everything else that comes with the market investing.
Right. Well, and the thing with the traditional model of saving for retirement, which is the model that both of us started off with and had invested heavily in, because that was the industry we're in. Really, the whole idea is that eventually over time, your investments will continue to shrink, because every year you're required to take out more and more and more of that, especially if it's in a taxable retirement account. The government requires you to take more and more of that. At a certain point, you will take everything out of that account, and then you will have nothing left for investments. And that's why Todd and Patricia and other folks in the personal finance community, including the FIRE community, the Financial Independence Retire Early community, are really starting to encourage people to do more than just invest in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, that kind of investment, but to actually look at other investments that do throw off some sort of income.
And that part of what you're describing there is exactly what Todd talked about, where he said the traditional model of investing requires some horrible assumptions that are hard to predict. You have to predict exactly when you're going to retire, which that may be the easiest of all the calculations.
Right.
You also have to predict what the market return is going to be over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
Well, it was funny because he was in the podcast, he was kind of joking that economists who went to school and got PhDs spend their whole life trying to do this correctly, trying to pick out what the market will return or what the economy will do, and they are constantly getting it wrong. Every year they get it wrong. What makes us think that we can do it any better?
Right, exactly. And then an even harder number to predict is where inflation is going to go and how that's going to affect the return on your investments. A more morbid prediction you have to make is when you're going to die,
or when your partner's going to die if you're with somebody.
So you have to predict, come up with this investment strategy that takes into account stock market gains, inflation, how much you're going to earn over the next 20, 30, 40 years, and then you have to predict when you're going to die so you don't end up dying before your money runs out. And it's just a horrible strategy, he said.
It kind of reminds me, when we're talking about this, it kind of reminds me of somebody in the kitchen, and I'm actually thinking of the Swedish chef from the Muppets, who just indiscriminately is throwing things into the bowl thinking that they're going to make this cake that is going to turn out as this beautiful cake without knowing how to measure things out, or knowing what exactly I don't know what this is. Is this a 1/3 of a cup? Is this a 1/4 of a cup? Is it a whole cup? It's that's the kind of way he was, or we were talking about getting to retirement.
Exactly. And I don't question the quality of the Swedish chef. So basically what Todd said is what you want to do is you want to create a cash flow system of retirement. You can even do this in your day-to-day life, but you want to make sure that every dollar has a job.
Yeah.
And with that dollar, you continue to grow your investments. And he has a three-pronged approach to being able to secure your day-to-day living as well as plan for retirement. And also, if you haven't prepared adequately for retirement and you're close to retirement age, this is a strategy. This is probably one of the quicker strategies that you can implement. That's not to say it's easy or that it'll be fast, but of all the options that are available to you, it's probably one of the quicker ones. And it's the three-pronged approach, some of which we've actually talked about on this very series. One is investing in the stock market. You definitely want to take advantage of what's in the stock market. There's no part of the economy designed for success quite like the stock market, and I'll stick with that to the day I die. The other prong to that is getting into creating your own business entrepreneurship. Right. You want to be able to generate a stream of income from your own business to some degree that can help subsidize your lifestyle. And that can be a part-time business, and it can be a full-time business. Or as we've talked about with some of the folks on the Career Money podcast, you can have multiple side hustles going at one time, all feeding into your cash flow.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a one that a lot of folks kind of forget about or don't think about, especially as we age, right? Who wants to try to start a side hustle when you're 50, 55, 60, 65 years old? But the reality is that it's easier today to do that than ever before. Yeah, totally. We're actually in a course ourselves to help grow our business and improve our business. And there are several people in that course who are in their 60s, and it's kind of it's kind of refreshing to see that there are people of that age. Hopefully they're doing this because they want to and not because they're desperate, but that they're doing this because they want to have that stream of income for later on in life.
Exactly. And then the third prong in this whole strategy, as you might have been able to pick up, is getting into real estate investing. And we've talked about this on several episodes of the Queer Money podcast, and including some of the folks from the not Stacking Benjamins, Bigger Pockets podcast about real estate investing. And this is why I would call your attention to listen to episode 253 of the Queer Money podcast coming up in a couple of weeks. We talk with Patricia Rudd Hawk about real estate investing and one of the easiest ways to get into that. But that ultimately, that three-pronged approach, all of those are somewhat ways to generate various streams of income, all combined can to create a day-to-day life that you might want today, as well as a retirement that you would want. And you don't necessarily have to die at a certain date.
Right.
That money can continue to generate long after you've passed away.
Right. And we all dream, I think, of that perfect Golden Girls retirement, right?
Yes, I do.
We dream of having that retirement, of being able to hang out with our friends and enjoy life and have those fun moments and all of that happening. But we have to remember, queer folks, if we gravitate towards the predominantly large LGBT population centers in the country, those cities on average have a 40% higher cost of living. So we're going to spend more money in retirement than many of our straight peers. As John mentioned earlier, the number of retirement facilities that are geared specifically to LGBT folks is so minute. There's probably less than 2,000 spots available for the millions of people in the LGBT community who are retiring even right now. So if retirement is 5, 10, 15, 20 years out for you, just imagine how those places will be completely full.
Yeah.
So other places may come online, but if they do, they're going to be very expensive.
So if you're thinking about a real estate strategy,
Yes.
opening up LGBTQ retirement communities or homes might be a way to go.
Yep,
Yes,
exactly.
a lot of opportunity there. So here, thank you for joining us for another Queer Money follow-up. Here's your Queer Money follow-up takeaway from this episode. Get your free copy of the 5 building blocks of a happy gay life at debtfreeguys.com/happy. And then let us know in the comments section below. We would love to know whether you think you're on a serious plan to retire for retirement, or if maybe you're got your head in the sand, which I think a lot of people in the community do, and hopefully this is a way.
And we were there too, right? Especially in our early 20s to early 30s, we just were not paying attention to retirement.
Exactly. And then join us for tomorrow, episode 51 of the Queer Money follow-up series, when we cover episode 51 of the Queer Money podcast. And we talk about 15 social media tricks to take your brand from bland to grand. So if you're thinking about one of those, the three-pronged approach was to start your own business. If you are starting your own business, David said that it's easier to do today than ever. One of the things you're going to want to leverage is social media. So we're going to tackle that, some tools to tackle that going into 2021. Then last but not leastly, please give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel, and then set notifications on this channel so you know when we go live with videos and you can join in the conversation. Thank you very much, and we will see you tomorrow.